bit about who you are, what you've done, and why you're joining us today.
I'm joining you because you invited me.
Well, what's the story behind it?
The story
Behind you.
The story behind it is rather simple, and I see a lot of faces that I know, so they probably know the story as well. I'm a Palestinian American, which means I was born in the States. I basically was rather politically active while I was in the States at that time through the General Union of Palestinian Students. And I had several major events happen to me, which I guess got me focused on Palestine in a very serious way. One was when I entered the university. I actually went to the university 1 year before graduating. I went to my last year of high school and my first year of university together, something called an early admission program. And in that year, we actually had the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. And that got my attention, specifically around what happened in Sabra and Shatila. For some very personal reasons, I became focused on that event. And that gave us a lot of activism in the States. During that time, there was a lot of political work happening. And then during the end of my schooling, my university days, the Intifada broke out. And when the Intifada broke out, it was something where I couldn't just sit down and watch, so I started to come here and bring basically groups. I brought about 7 groups and toured while I was doing that. And during this entire period, I was working in the States in software development. I worked for 2 firms, both of them national software development firms in the direct marketing industry. I won't tell you what language I developed in, so you don't laugh at me. It's an old language. Actually, it was one of the first relative databases that ever came out. So although it's old, it was the beginning of the technology that I assume all of you are using today. And in 1994, while I was working, I had come back to Palestine in 93 and got married. My wife and I went to the States. In 94, the Oslo Accords were signed. I read the Accords. I was very much against them. I know today everybody's against them, but I was against them in 1994. And I wrote against them and so forth. And after seeing the Accords being forced down our throat, the entire world supporting them, I went and I reread the agreement again. And I looked for something positive in the agreement, and I found Article 36, which was the telecommunications annex. And I have a minor in telecommunications, so I took interest in that annex. And to make a long story short, I was recruited after I sought them out. I went and looked for who the investors were that were talking about building a telecom company. I just lost the power. And I basically was recruited with another individual, Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, and he and I came back together and put together Paltal, and I've been here ever since. That's me, in a nutshell, if I can fit in a nutshell.
So what was your biggest contribution to the telecom sector?
That's a hard one, because when you are involved in a company of that size and that magnitude in terms of investment and in terms of technical challenge, there is not one person that provides a huge contribution. It's a collective effort by design. I guess the starting point for me, or my personal contribution, was working with Dr. Mustafa before the company was created to negotiate a license with the Palestinian Authority. That was a very difficult time. First, it was a mess. We had just taken over a network that almost nobody exactly knew how it was designed or how to run it. The ministry was running it in the meantime, and we were negotiating with the PA, which didn't know how to negotiate, I wouldn't say at all, but maybe at all, but for sure didn't know how to negotiate telecommunications. So between working with PA officials and working with their consultants, which I believe was KPMG at the time, that took about 1.5 years of some very, very hard work, running between Ramallah, Nablus, and Tel Aviv and Gaza to put together the company. So when the company was created, I feel that I had a major role in going through the licensing and also working as the counterpart to our consultants, who were BT Teleconsult. BT Teleconsult is a company, I don't know if it still exists, but it's a consulting company in the UK, which is made up of ex-BT retired experts in telecom. And they were the team that we hired to come and help us on the company side. And I was their counterpart, and that was a learning experience for me. So I guess that would be my contribution.
So when did you decide that it was time to kind of exit the telecom sector and kind of start doing something else, and what were you doing after that?
Everybody in this room is probably too young to remember, right? That was a rather major thing for me personally. Because when I came from the States to relocate here, that's a big challenge, especially for someone born in the States to come to Palestine to live without the language and without the full knowledge of the culture and the reality on the ground, even though I used to visit. But being here and working in this environment was very different than what I'm used to. But I came not to build a telecommunications company, even though that's what I was working in. And without trying to sound like a slogan, I came back to resist the occupation. I wanted to be on the ground as close as possible to what was happening throughout this process of Oslo. It was just convenient for me to pick up on telecommunications and work there, but it was a struggle against the Israeli side at the end of the day, and that's how I saw it. And in a way, I see my work in the private sector today the same way. I'm not here to make $1 million. If I was, I'd go back to the States. It's much easier there. In my opinion, and this doesn't have to be everybody's opinion, but in my opinion, the work in the private sector, in creating jobs, in creating value, is a way for us to remain engaged and on the ground. And I translate this to politics at the end of the day. The core conflict is between people and land. We see what's happening to the land. We're not exactly sure what's happening with the people. I think that we are being suffocated out of our own homes. So one way to counter that suffocation is to work in business and make sure people have a livelihood here. So when I decided to leave Paltel, I didn't decide to leave. Something happened in front of me that caused me to leave. And it was basically, and I say this knowing that there's a lot of Paltel employees here, and I say this not out of a aggression towards Paltel, because I don't think Paltel is fully to blame. I believe that the regulatory environment here, the PA specifically, is squarely to blame. But what was happening was the regulatory body here, the PA, the Ministry of Telecom, was very, very weak. Of course it was weak. We just took over a part of the Palestinian territory. We never ran a country or a quasi-country or a mini-country before. So everything was being built together. So I didn't really have much surprise that the Palestinian Authority took a lot of time before they understood what telecom was about. And I'll be very frank with you, in the beginning, a lot of the people in the ministry we were talking to were more worried about how high the telephone pole is than, for example, how the tariff structure is set up, or how the network connectivity is happening. It was a very traditional, old-fashioned kind of approach to telecom. But basically, I saw that the company I was working for, was abusing the role that they were playing, because they abused that very weak regulatory body to really do more than I believe they should have done. And that's a debate. It's not only a debate with Sam and the company, it's a debate in most business schools around the world. Some will say that as long as you follow the rules as a company, that's all that's really required from you. Anything else you do is your prerogative. But as long as you're not doing anything illegal, even if you're taking an entire population for a ride, you're allowed to. The other school of thought says no, that companies have a corporate responsibility to hold themselves accountable to moral standards and not abuse their customer. So this is a debate globally, not just here. It played itself out here in telecommunications. I didn't accept it, again, because probably I came with more of a political outlook on companies should be part of this resisting the occupation, and I didn't see it. So when I left Paltel, I left with a very, very long analysis of the telecom sector. And I actually put that analysis in the paper. Remember, even Al-Quds newspaper never really covered economic affairs so deeply. So when I sent them my article, I only write in English because I don't know how to write in Arabic, so I wrote my analysis in English. I had to get it translated. And if you translate for me, you have a very hard job, because I sit there and go over word for word because I know what I want to say, I just don't know how to say it. And then I sent it to the paper. And the paper called Mahad Sheikh, if you know him, he's the editor he's still there today, I believe. And he called me and said, And as soon as I got the call, because it was a very critical article, I thought, shoot, they're not going to print it. It's too aggressive. And it turns out probably, again, I don't know for a fact, they probably didn't even read it because it was kind of too technical and so forth. So when he called, he said, "You're Sam?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "You sent us this long article?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "It's too long for one time. Can we put it into two editions?" I was like laughing. "Yes, I can get 2 times in the paper instead of 1. So they published the first half of the article. Of course, Paltel does read and knew exactly what I was saying, and I became public enemy number 1 for a couple years. And I was waiting for the second half to come out. 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. So I put my activist hat back on, and I went back to the paper and I said, "Listen, you're the one who told me you wanted to split the article, not me. You either put the second half, or my next article will be about you." And they put the second half, and that was my exit. So my exit was a little bit of a statement about how the affairs of telecom were going forward. And again, this was a debate it was a very heated debate at the time, maybe because of age and also because of reality. I think we've all taken different kinds of positions on how the sector is developing, and I guess we'll get to that in a little bit.
So has their direction changed at all since you've left, or has it stayed very similar, in your opinion?
That's also a hard question. Yes, it's changed, of course. Nobody's position stays the same. I believe Paltel went through some poor management for several years, which instigated the issues in town. One that I remember specifically, I don't know if you remember it as well, but the subscription-free internet, SFI. Does anybody remember the SFI debate? Probably not. If you want to study telecom in Palestine, the SFI issue will be a chapter in your book, because Paltel decided that the internet was the one area that was deregulated. Remember, we came, and I was part of this, and I can defend it even till today. At that time, we negotiated a monopoly license. So we had mobile, fixed line, a monopoly license for these services. However, internet provisioning was already on the ground before the Palestinian Authority was set up. We had PowNet, we had Planet, we had, I forget the other names. So when Paltel took over, our focus was on mobile and fixed line because it was a mess. We didn't have mobile, and Paltel fixed lines had, I believe, around 200,000 on the waiting list when we took over. 200,000 out of a 4 million population. That's unheard of. So that's where our focus was. When I left the company about 2 years later, the focus of the company became focused on, wait a second, how can we allow all these internet providers to go and get connectivity directly from abroad, mostly, if not all, through Israeli operators? In a way, they had the right calculation because they saw where technology was going. If you were supplying internet services and connectivity, it was only a matter of time before you were going to provide telephony over that connectivity. So they had a right calculation on where technology was going, but then they decided to monopolize the service provisioning. And it was a big debate. It was a serious debate. I was personally threatened. There were workers of Paltel in the street demonstrating against PETA, the Palestine Telecom IT Association. That's how heated the debate was. Paltel won that debate. Paltel won the ability to turn all the internet service providers into resellers of their own provisioning. That was the whole crux of the matter. Today, that's a different story. There's now an ability for an internet company to get direct connectivity from abroad and so forth. But that was a very interesting change that took place, and it was a fierce one. So that was the biggest change that happened. Today, when you have a second mobile operator, I think that's the second biggest change. And it's not a change that Paltel accepted easily. It was a struggle to get a second operator license. And even after getting a second operator license, they're not able to operate in Gaza because the Israelis aren't allowing equipment in and so forth. So it's not all completed yet. So those are the two big milestones that I see after I left, SFI and a second operator entering. The weak part of the sector, and it remains a weak part of the sector, and it's one that if this IT maybe oriented audience is not aware of, then we're in deep trouble, which is the regulatory body to regulate this sector is still not in place. Today, the ministry, a political ministry, whether we like the ministry or not, that's not the issue, but a political ministry is playing the role of an independent regulator. That doesn't create growth, it doesn't create transparency, and it doesn't allow you to be able to compete in the telecom realm. Why is that important? Because in our economy, there are only a couple buckets that have a lot of value. Telecom is one of them. So if telecom is not regulated, then only a few players are benefiting from all the wealth in that sector. So I lay a lot of blame and a lot of responsibility on the authority to pass the telecommunication. They actually did pass the law. It's sitting on the president's desk. And he's refusing to move it forward in order to allow an independent regulatory body to be created. And that's something that should be on top of our agenda.
Seems like there's a lot of challenges with the telecommunication industry. So that was your past. So what is the present? What are you passionate about? What are you working on now? And how involved are you in the startup community, or the startups in general?
I've moved away from IT for many reasons. I'm more involved now into business strategy. I have my own business consulting firm, which I actually created when I left Paltel in 1997. This firm is more at a strategy executive council level with a touch on trying to tap investments. I'm currently working on a large contract with Birzeit University. Birzeit has a deep financial crisis, and they have hired us to come in and try to bring in private sector entities to partner with them using university assets, whether it's land, buildings, staff, faculty, or whatever, to be able to create a revenue stream for the university. That's a very big project that we're working on. It's a huge challenge as well. So that's how I pay the bills at the end of the month.
You're working with any startups currently?
Yes, I actually am. I'm working with two. I'm a mentor for one in the States. It's called Pivot, if you've heard about it. It's at Harvard. I believe Palto may be interested. I think they're actually getting involved in it. Pivot is a very interesting application because they've created an application. They're using Palestine as their test bed. And what they're doing is saying that there are sites around the world that change, right? Like Calendia, for example, or any of the historic sites here. And what they're doing is they're finding old pictures and they're superimposing the old pictures on the new site. So when I'm passing through the old city of Jerusalem and I stand in front of the Dome of the Rock, if I pick up my phone and go into their application, I can see the live Dome of the Rock, and I can see throughout history what has changed. How did it look 20 years ago? How did it look 100 years ago? If this works, you can imagine the potential base that it has. It's not only about Palestine, it's about any tourist location. They've already been approached by museums. So when you go to a museum and you're looking at whatever it is you're looking at, that you can bring up this application and they can start feeding you information about what you're looking at, audio-visual. So this is one that we meet on a monthly basis on Skype, and we're working through their startup phase, which is a real startup. They just won a Harvard award to get, I think it was $25,000 or $50,000 to get them moving one step further.
What exactly is your role with the startup?
What they've told me my role is a mentor. And they remind me every month what a mentor is.
What is a mentor?
For me, I pick up the phone or I pick up Skype once a month and they walk through what they did that month, and whatever insight I have, I give them. And it's important, I think, to realize there is not one mentor that has all the insight you need. So if you look at their website, you'll see about 4 or 5 mentors, and that's the right approach. Because you want 4 or 5 people coming from 4 or 5 different walks of life with 4 or 5 different experiences. And if you're smart as an entrepreneur and you ask the right questions within an hour every month, you'll get a lot of insight. If you're not too smart and you have one mentor and you try to take 5 hours of his time every time you call, you will end up with no mentor. So that's one that I'm working on.
What are some good questions to ask a mentor to kind of be smart, be a smart entrepreneur?
I don't think there is a set of questions. I know we all want what are the 10 things I need to do and what are the 5 questions. I don't work like that. I believe everything has its own set of challenges, And depending on what they are doing and what weaknesses they have, they need to ask. They may not have weaknesses that I can help with, but they may. So for me, every set of challenges in every startup or every company is very, very different. The other startup I'm working on, it's not really a startup anymore, it's already operational and making revenue, is e-Kitab. Does anyone know e-Kitab? They have a lot of work to do yet. E-Kitab basically is digitizing ebooks, Arabic ebooks. And they're picking up, it's only a year old, so I'm not surprised you don't know them. But they're basically creating a platform where you can have Arabic ebooks from major publishers. So that's an interesting one that we're doing more of an investment kind of support with.
Great. What are some challenges that these startups have faced? Have they faced any real challenges that they've kind of come to you for?
Look, the ones I've worked on, and these are the two that I'm working on now, I've worked on others prior. Usually the person comes or the team comes and what's in their mind is, we don't have funding. If we only found funding, everything would work out. And usually I'm the one to tell them in a very bold way that if you're starting with you're needing funding, then you don't know, you're not making the right pitch. If you have your work done, if you've done your homework, if you're not too aggressive in what you're trying to do, I believe funding is out there. I actually believe in Palestine that there's more funding on the table than there are projects being able to tap it. And I know that from sitting on a board of a bank as well. We're not seeing projects come forward with real business plans. What we're seeing is some great ideas asking for $500,000. There's a big gap in between, and that gap basically makes them fail. So funding usually is what they come with. I believe, and again, I don't like to generalize, but for this session I'll make a couple general comments. I think first and foremost, the challenge in the Palestinian entrepreneurship community is understanding the market that they're trying to serve. Because a lot of people are trying to create applications for a critical mass that is external to Palestine, which makes sense because Palestine doesn't have enough of a critical mass of a market. If you're trying to make an application that you want people in California to use, you need to know that market. And I don't see I only see a couple, so I can't say that I'm an expert, but I don't see people putting investment and time into deeply understanding their markets. Instead, I see a community that is solid educationally, from a science and math perspective, and are focused heavily on technology. And I hate to burst the bubble, but someone who has taken a few steps away from IT and moved more towards investment and strategy, technology is something we can buy. When I want to do something that needs technology, I look in the market just like I look for apples at the hispid. I look for the table that's the cleanest, with the reddest apples, and somebody who looks like he knows what he's doing when selling it. And I can buy that. And in a way, technology for me today is the same way. And that wasn't the case. When I was just starting out my career, technology was part and parcel of what you did, because this outsourcing of technology wasn't there, wasn't mature yet. But today it is. So, one of the things I'm sad about is that I get requests or things come across my desk where people are looking for developers. And I just had a case, I was talking to someone here a couple minutes ago before we started. 3 days ago, I had an interesting case of someone in the States looking for a development team. So I pointed them to Palestine. I actually pointed them a year and a half ago to Palestine, and when they came and told me how they were dealt with, I almost wanted to crawl under a chair. So I found out that there's another firm that has some capacity, and I readdressed them to go and try this firm out, and I'm hoping it will work out. So although we try, and especially those of us from the diaspora, those of us that come from outside of Palestine have networks. And if you make yourself available, if you make your capacity available to us, then when we're networking for social reasons or business reasons, we should be able to transfer or push some business your way. But if we push somebody your way and you can't write a proposal, or you price 5 times more than India, or I don't know what else, then the basics aren't there for you to sell, because you have to sell. All I can do is recommend. And that's a challenge that we're facing.
So you were saying that startups here typically focus on abroad, and that's true. But would you say that they shouldn't be focusing on the Palestinian market? If you look at the telecom sector, it's lacking a lot of innovation, a lot of new technology that can be easily developed. Would you recommend that startups focus on the telecom sector, the banking sector in Palestine to create that innovation, that technology?
Again, it depends. We need this. It depends on what we're doing, right? I come from a school of thought. Anybody who worked with me at PETA will know what I'm going to say, because I said it probably 3,000 times already. I believe our local market is the fertile market that we should be trying to serve for a lot of our projects. If we can't serve Ramallah, we're going to have a very, very hard time serving Arkansas. And I think a lot of what we do can be done here. Now, I say that, and I'm an old school developer, right? I didn't grow up in the application market, in the 3G world. So I know there may be some twist to what I'm going to say. But when we were doing just hard coding on, providing applications, desktop applications, I always used to look at the local market as a starting point. And when someone says, well, the market is so small, the market has money being thrown out of the window for very little value added. And I have one example that I continue to use, and this is a 25-year example, and I bet you in the next 25 years I'll be able to keep saying the same thing. Forms management at the PA level. Sounds pretty low tech, right? Why can't we provide Palestinian solution to Palestinian forms? Have any of you tried to fill out a form in one of the PA offices or the municipality offices? It's been copied so many times you can't read it. It's crooked. It has no coding. It has no version number. You know more about form management than I do. That basic application can serve our community. When I want to go file for a passport or a driver's license or an export permit, why 20 years after the creation of the Palestinian Authority? Why 20 years after the development of an IT sector in Palestine can I not go to a website and figure out the procedure with the forms before I get up and take my car and go to the office? If we can't manage forms, I'm not sure how we're going to manage a country. That's one example that I use. I'm sure there's 1,000 others. But to me, that's something that I think we can rally around to be able to get some of this donor money that's coming into the Sulta to actually come to a product that will actually help people understand the systems in front of them. And it creates more transparency and so forth.
That's fine. So I want to take us back to a conversation that you and I were having about the bridge between the experienced professionals of Palestine and the youth. Can you see maybe a correlation between the government and the tech sector? Because for example, in the UK, people who are developing the online system for the government are private sector entrepreneurs. So the government actually approached these people to build it for them. Here, I've been part of the entrepreneur community for an entire year. I have not met one single government official. They probably have no idea what we're doing, what we're working on. Do you see maybe there's a bridge that's missing between us and them?
Can I ask the microphone to be lowered so it doesn't keep ringing, if possible? Okay. We can hear. They wanted for that to steal out. Okay. Look, I think there's, again, could be a very long debate, but I think there's a little bit of a misnotion. I think we, as people living in a depressed economy, under occupation, with a lot of needs, are putting too much waiting time for the PA to come and solve our issues for us. I worked in software development for about 10 years in the States. I don't remember one day that my boss or my team was waiting for the Ohio government to come do something for us. That doesn't mean the government didn't have venues or platforms or funding incentives or tax breaks. That's, I think, what we need to be looking for. And whether they're there or not, I don't think should be the bottleneck for what we do. We all want, I think the best government in the world is still challenged because the citizens want a little bit more. So we have a right to want more from our government, but if our startup is waiting for the Ministry of Economy to come knock on our door to solve something for us, I think we're waiting for the wrong person to knock. Having said that, I think we have to understand our reality as well. Our government is not a government. Our government in reality is a hybrid between a government, a mix of donors, and a mix of private sector big players. That's kind of what our government is made of, even though I know that doesn't all make sense. So I think where the government fails, we have to do some digging to find out where in the donor community are there potentials to get them driven towards something which is better serving us. I mean, today, literally today, I looked for the first time at the PMDP program. You're aware of this program? Who's aware of the PMDP program? Shocking. This program, I knew about it from a long time ago, but today I decided for the first time in my life I'm going to try to use a donor program and see if I can benefit from it. It's a program which is a very not stupid, it's a very nice and streamlined application that when you fill the application, you're able to benefit from up to, I think, $70,000 or $80,000, as long as whatever you ask for, you're willing to pay 25% of that. And it's accepting a lot of, the array of things that they'll support is a lot, from travel to conferences to I don't know what else. So, I mean, those kinds of programs, when they're not known, and I've ignored these for a long time. I have a sensitivity to the entire donor world. When we leave those available without knowing about them, a few people will know about them and use them or abuse them. And I think the benefit from the community is missing. And I think we need to really start looking at them, because that's the filler between where our government is and where our government should be. And I know those come loaded. They come with restrictions. And we need to look at those and challenge them. If they come with restrictions that we think is out of line with our development, we need to challenge the donor and get them to change the restrictions. And it's for different donors, there's different challenges. USAID is a big challenge. But the European donors, some of them are rather flexible if you approach them in a concrete and collective way. And I think we need to do that, and I need to do that more as well, because that's the gap that fills the weaknesses in our government. It's not ideal, it's not the best way to go about things, but it's there, it's a resource. If we don't use it, we'll lose it.
So going back to my question, so this is the second part of it, is how do we get experienced professionals like yourself and throughout Palestine connected to the young entrepreneurial community? We mentioned that there's no connection, nothing bringing them together.
True.
You said that you would like to be part of this, and you are surprised that there are so many young people interested in this kind of topics, but you don't know how to connect with them.
No, you're absolutely right. I do think that there's a gap there's a generational gap. I mean, I don't know most of you, and that's hard. Because at one time in Palestine, I probably knew everybody in the IT sector. So for me not to know most of the people in the room is a very clear confirmation that there's a big gap, a generational gap. I don't think that's a Palestinian disease per se. I think the generational gap exists everywhere. I do think we have a more conservative, old-time investment community that's more bricks and mortars. They want to invest, and they have probably two big issues when they invest. One is they want to invest in the tangible, the land, the building. They want to see the machine. They want to touch the machine before they go sleep at night to make sure everything is there. So when we come and try to promote a virtual product to them, we're really talking on a very, very different level that is not registering. And the second is, I believe that there's a problem in the older generation in terms of ownership of ideas. If you bring the best idea in the world to them, and even if they're convinced inside that you have something, they won't show it. Because it's more of a family kind of business mentality, that if I don't come up with the idea, it can't be so great. And that is also a barrier, I think, for them to say, number one, I want to get into something virtual, and number two, I'm willing to accept that you have a great idea, and I want to be part of it. Because I think the mainstream thinking today is, you have a great idea? Great, thanks for telling me, bye. Would you like to work on for me? Because I have a great idea. And that's the, I think, disease that we have. Now, some of these platforms, eZone or Leaders or others, I think are good platforms. And I think this venue itself, in bringing us, I'm talking as if I'm a 90-year-old, to bring those of us that have other kinds of experiences from maybe a different phase of our development to interact is one step forward. But to be honest with you, I spoke to about 12 of you before I sat in this chair. I haven't collected one business card yet. So there's a weakness here, right? You're coming here, I guess you paid, I don't know why you paid to come here, but you paid to come here, right? So it's Leonard's fault. Everybody can take their refund on the way out.
No refunds.
But I think this is one step forward. But if you're taking out of your time to come to hear someone, number one, make sure I have something to take home from you. Cash would be good. If not, business card is okay. But more importantly, what do you want from me? I mean, okay, insight and discussion is great, and we can have this all the time. You can call me, we can go for coffee. You don't have to pay to come talk to hear me. But I mean, if there's something that you feel of value that I can provide, or anybody else within the network that comes and visits you, connect with them. But don't connect in a weak way. It's like when between Paltal and between creating applied information management, I had a project that I did. It was a project of creating the Plaza Shopping Center. Do you know the Plaza Shopping Center? Mm-hmm. Bravo Supermarket? Tariq Akkad, who was one of the 4 investors in Paltal, when we first put Paltal together, when he saw that I left Paltal, he called and said, listen, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to open up a consulting firm. He goes, will you take on this project for me? We want to build a chain of supermarkets. I said, me, supermarket? Why would you even call me? And then I went back to my CV. Lesson number 1, never leave the last thing on the CV there. Update your CV and don't become attached to every single line. I worked with my dad in the grocery business for 10, 12 years in the States, and like most people, I couldn't just remove that from my CV. That's me. That's what I'm about. I spent 12 years of my life there, and I left it there. Unfortunately, he read my CV all the way to the bottom, and he said, you have some experience in, okay. So I actually took on the project. I told him I could only do it for about a year and a half. That turned out to be a 5-year project. When we went above ground in the construction, the Intifada started, and Tariq and the board came to me, and they sat me in the boardroom, and they said, Sam, we love you, and you're doing a great job, but if you haven't noticed, F-16s are literally bombing Ramallah, and you're asking for an approval to buy a glass facade for the Plaza Shopping Center. Have you not had breakfast? And I told them, listen, I'm not here to build a shopping center or to build telecom. We started a project, it's going to hire 220 people, I need to finish it. I asked for one thing, leave me alone. I think they thought I was nuts, I'm kind of big, so they got a little bit scared. And I told them, leave me alone, whatever money you put into the bank, I will not ask for more money from you. And let me see if I can finish the project. Have you gone to the project? I'm sure you went to Bravo and Bahour, right? What shape of building is it? L shape, right? If you come to my house, I'll show you the original plans. It was a U shape, but I didn't have money, so I took out one of the legs. I was supposed to have a cinema underground. If you go underground now, there's some very dirty bathrooms and about 30 parking spaces. Didn't have money for that either. So I actually created that company, which was good for me, because it got me out of telecom in this world of IT, which is kind of silo-based. You know, we work with foreign suppliers, we speak English, we're most of the time sitting behind a computer, and I do that now as well. The 5 years that I spent at Plaza gave me a touch of reality. That when we say entrepreneurship, it doesn't have to be IT. And if it is IT, you need to come to the non-IT businesses and sell us your IT solutions, and that will connect, I think, back to your question. It's one way to connect what you're doing in the new globalized kind of economy and connecting it to us. Why doesn't Bravo have an application today? I don't know. Are you trying to market to them an application? These kinds of, we're all trying to create the next Google, and I think we need to create the next low-tech technical solution to real companies on the ground. And I think those are case studies that you put on your CV, your profile, and that will get you the investment you need to do the bigger thing in your mind.
Great.
Sorry for the long answer.
That was perfect. I think that was really great. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, ask away.
I can ask not only questions, comments, suggestions.
Okay.
Just don't throw shoes.
You want his business card?
Yes.
So I've got 3 things to say. First question is, what was the language in which you developed your first program? Because you never put that out. Number 2, I have a business card for you, but I think you already have mine. And 3 is a real question. What are the challenges for the private sector in doing business in the occupied context in terms of normalization, and what advice would you give to private sector companies that are trying to be clean of normalization?
Okay. First question, the program that we, or the language we developed, which is also a database, it's called PIC. Anybody hear of PIC? P-I-C-K? It was one of the first relational databases that was invented in 1964 by a guy named Richard Pick or something. And it stayed, it was so solid, it became outdated of course, but it was so solid that it remained active until probably around 2000, 2001, which is unbelievable. I mean, for a program to live that long. And then I had a bout with COBOL for a period of time and so forth. But those are, to me, it's not the language. And again, that's something, I mean, I try to tell my daughters as well when they're studying. It's not what you're studying. You're learning how to study, how to think. If you're doing it in Oracle, or if you're doing it in Java, if you're doing it in PIC, yes, there's a challenge, you need to learn the language, but ultimately you need to learn the theories behind the languages, and then you'll catch the language, you'll catch. But if you don't have the theory, I don't care how well you catch the actual commands, it doesn't mean anything to understand how to put things together. So for me, it was a great learning curve, because I learned for the first time when relational databases weren't even on the global scene yet, I learned it. I'll take your business card after we finish. Normalization is an interesting thing, and I spend a lot of time discussing this with people. I don't know what normalization means, and I know there's a clear definition somewhere on a website, and we're supposed to follow it per. I personally respect all the different opinions out there. I don't believe it's me to define what's normalization and not. Having said that, because I don't want to, because normalization in our community has become like the word terrorism in the West. You just say it and all of a sudden there's a stereotype, and I don't think it's that clear. I don't think the word terrorism is that clear, and I don't think the word normalization is that clear. So putting the loaded words aside, let me give you my opinion about Israeli companies and how to work with them. Personally, I don't. Personally, I've never taken money from Israeli companies, and I suggest that if you don't have to, don't. Anything that we're taking from our occupier is something that will reduce our ability to be able to have a clearer political vision of how we're going to deal with this occupier. Having said that, I think we also have to come to terms that not every single person in the street can we label as our occupier. And that's a hard thing for our community to decide. And I'm going to give you a story. It's a very short one. Something that happened to me about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which I was very, to be honest with you, depressed about. How many of you, and I'm sorry if I'm going to go into politics for a second here, how many of you know the Israeli organization called Zuhurot? A couple. Zuhurot is an Israeli NGO. It's anti-Zionist, and it's for the right of return. And they spend their time going to the destroyed 430 villages, trying to put names on the villages so people don't forget. If there's any Israeli that we can live with, it's the members of Zuhurot, in my opinion. So one day I got in touch with them, and I wanted to bring them to Ramallah. So I thought it's a no-brainer. I mean, it was the midst of the Second Intifada was still brewing, let's say. It was still at the end of the Second Intifada. And I basically said, I'll help you set up a venue. It shouldn't be hard. I mean, your politics are in the right place. And we set a date and everything, and I started to look for a venue. And I called a couple political-oriented NGOs that I know, and they said, we love them, but nah, we can't give them our hall. I was like, okay. We went to the next one. Oh, they're great people, but nah, we don't want to be part of it. So that caught my attention. And I have a bad habit that when I'm challenged, I take the challenge most of the time. So I said, okay, who can I ask who will say yes for sure? And I thought, and I thought, and I thought, and I said, the Quakers. The Quakers love everybody. They never say no. So I went to the Quakers and I said, this group wants to come give, oh, we love them, yeah, let them come. So for the first time in my life, I had just got on Facebook. I avoided Facebook as long as possible. I think it's a time drainer par excellence. So I avoided it. When my daughters got on Facebook, I decided I need to be on Facebook too. So I got on Facebook. I was just getting my friends list ramped up, and I was happy and looking for the likes every couple hours, and it was kind of neat. And I said, okay, I'm learning that they have this event. That's pretty cool. You can put an event, and people say they're going to come. So I said, this will be my first event. So I made a brochure myself. At night, I made a beautiful PDF brochure about the right of return. I listed all 430 villages just in case anybody forgot any of them. And I put a picture of people with, in 48 when they were leaving. It's a piece of art. I'll show it to you. And I put my first event online. Zukhrot coming to Ramallah for the first time. We're going to talk about how we implement the right of return, not just keep talking about it as a right. I thought I was progressing this community together. And within 48 hours, there were 60 pages of comments threatening me, calling me a traitor. Somebody from the police, a friend of mine, called me. He said, Sam, what are you doing? I said, right now I'm in my pajamas behind my computer. What's going on? He said, a group of youth came and they asked for a permit to demonstrate against the event that you put on Facebook. Why? Why would someone do that? And to make a long story short, it took about 3 days. For the first time in my life, I backed out one step. I canceled the event. Because I speak to the media regularly. I speak in public about politics almost 3 times a week. And I envisioned myself, I'm standing across from Ruka, inside is the event at the Quaker House, and CNN is there interviewing me, and 100 Palestinian youth are saying they're going to kill the people inside and kill me. How do I explain to CNN that the people inside are calling for the right of return and the youth are demonstrating against them? That was classified by a very small number of people as normalizing. To me, it was a stupid move that showed me that people aren't going into the depth of the issue itself. Why did I say that story? Because I think the same thing applies in our investment and entrepreneurship world. Although I said my own preference is not to take from Israelis. However, I know, and I guess the venue actually hosted some people who are working within the Israeli community. Some of these people are working with Palestinian partners. To me, that's a big plus. If a Palestinian partner is leading an effort and I'm interfacing, if that setup happens to have an Israeli or a Jewish, if it's Jewish, I really have no problem with that at all. If it's an Israeli, I need to understand who that Israeli is. If it's Ariel Sharon, I may have a serious problem. If it's XYZ, who either is not apolitical or positive in his politics, I might be able to swallow it. But if you ask me, if you put in front of me 2 investors, one is an Israeli investor and one is a Chinese investor, I'll probably take the Chinese one. So I don't see it as black and white. I guess that's the message I want to pass to you. There's no easy answer to that question.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Cindy. So when you said that we should start marketing to local markets, the Palestinian market, wouldn't that be limiting ourselves to the Palestinian? Because the Palestinian market is so small and it is very limited. And in terms of other markets, it's so different. So when you're marketing a product to the Palestinian market and then you want to grow, that's a compromise between long-term growth and short-term growth. Big success or just...
I totally agree. I put a condition depending on what you're doing. However, when you're first starting out, I think it's healthy not to try to create a Google, but to try to create a local application. Not every idea is applicable to the local market. And sometimes the local market, even though something is applicable, we can't get anyone to pay for it. Tell me, I'm a consultant, right? When I first started out in consulting, I wanted to focus on ICT consulting back in '97. So I opened on Shadat El-Sad, I opened an office, I hired 3 or 4 people, I got an excellent brochure, I got my services down pat, and I opened the doors for business, and nobody came. Because I learned the hard way, consultancy in Palestine is not, and especially the way I was promoting myself. And if you see my business card, you'll see I even say I'm an independent consultant. God forbid, who would want to hire an independent consultant in Palestine? That means they're going to tell you something that you might not want to hear. I learned the hard way that consultancy, and I can make a case about this, in a very big way in our community is not about consultancy. It's about hiring a third party to give you a report on his stationery of your opinion. I don't work that way. And anybody who has worked with me before knows that if I have an opinion and I know you don't like it, too bad, I'm going to tell it to you. And you can take it or not take it, because to me that's what consultancy is about. It's like that mentor issue that I talked about earlier. You take opinions from 4 or 5 mentors. You can take or leave their opinion. But if you want to ask an opinion, you have to be ready to receive it, of course, politely. So I agree with you, not everything applies locally. But if I just got out of the university and I know my Java language and I have an idea, I would promote someone not to jump and try to think of a global product. Because number one, I don't think we graduate from Palestine having enough insight into the global market, period. And I'm talking not about bachelor's, I'm talking about master's degree students as well. I don't think we exit knowing marketing. And I know this for a fact because marketing as a discipline is only newly introduced into the Palestinian university system, maybe 5 or 10 years. So we have a long way to go to be able to have the tools to analyze markets. So I would tell people, analyze your local market because that's the one you know most about right now. And it may not be after you graduate, it may be your senior project. But let's try to serve our local market first for us to be able to have a stepping stone before we jump to some global market. But again, it depends what you're doing. I mean, if you have a team that has all the right components and you have a great idea, don't limit yourself if you don't need to. But I think most of the young entrepreneurs would do themselves well by thinking a little bit smaller.
Hi, first of all, I would say this is my best startup drawing event. I will always send you. Thanks a lot.
I'll send you a bill.
And second, I want to ask you, like, what advice, like, knowing what you know at this age, what advice would you give, like, people in our age just starting thinking, building businesses, how not to let the past, the conflict, the history hold us back and be pragmatic and futurist, though as a Palestinian, as a country, don't see a state. Like, it's, like I see for Palestinian entrepreneurs, it's even hard because we don't plan for the future. We don't know what's going to happen the year after. We are not sure of tomorrow, especially that I'm from Jerusalem and now there's problems. So what advice do you tell us? Like, you give advice looking at the local markets, but then it's really hard. And I feel that the conflict, like, it raises us on like principles and like the message that as a Palestinian, as a people, we have to deliver. Yet on the other hand, it was weighing us down and making us afraid, like to dream, afraid, like to look, thinking this is impossible, we can't do this. So what kind of advice would you?
Well, at age 90, because I'm 90, you make this sound. Look, I mean, I don't personally, and I come from a political activist world. That's my background, right? I don't think we can detach ourselves from our past, and I don't encourage you to detach yourself from your past. Just the opposite. If you look at go to my LinkedIn and you'll see the things I'm involved in. Yes, I do work, I pay bills, I help out a couple entrepreneurs, but I'm also involved in about 7 or 8 civil society organizations. That's how I decided to work in my civil work. So I don't think we should try to detach ourselves from our past. If anything, we should be activating ourselves in the conflict so we can help contribute to ending it. That doesn't mean you have to stay on the street 24 hours. It means pick something constructive and get involved in it. In the meantime, it's a challenge. And I don't have a magic wand to say, if you do this, you can think clearly. None of us are thinking clearly. If you're coming from Jerusalem every day, you're not thinking clearly coming to Ramallah, right? We are not thinking clearly moving forward. And to me, that's the challenge. That's the challenge. When we have venues like this, when you can find an ability to tap others, and to me, I think maybe if I wanted to give advice, and I don't give advice simply, but I would say teaming up with others. Too many times people come as individuals. I have a great idea. I just need $100,000. Who's with you? It's mine. I can't really tell you the whole idea even because, I think step number 1, if you want to think forward and try to be as constructive as possible in this unconstructive reality, team up. Team up. And that's hard for us to do. We are great as individuals. We are resilient as individuals, right? As teams, we have problems. And we have it on the political level, we have it on the business level. The happiest thing I learned a couple of days ago is 2 major software development firms in Palestine merged. Something I've been asking for to happen since I started with Pita back in 1999. Why does, and I'm saying this, I'm partly, I have my consulting firm, I have my business card, I'm the managing partner. It doesn't matter that I work by myself, but I have all those, right? And I work with freelancers, because God forbid when I bring them in the company and give them assets and give them equity, I'm part of the problem as well. So when we're able to team up at all levels, on the entrepreneurship level, at the company level, we need to start merging. We're too small of a community, and I know what I'm saying might have a double-edged sword. Some might correctly say, wait a minute, Sam, you're wrong. All of these small businesses is what creates our resilience. It gives us a competitive environment, and it makes us move. That might be true for some things, but if in the entrepreneurship level per se, I cannot become convinced when one person comes to me and he wants to do the whole idea by himself. And believe me, many have come and asked for help, and they have no team with them. You just give me $100,000, I'm going to make a team. And I tell them, no, you go make a team, and you all come back and ask for $100,000.
There's more value in the team than the idea.
Absolutely. In anything we do, not in a political discussion, but in the politics you can see the value of unity, I think, I hope, right? But by ourselves we won't be able to do much. And it's not convincing. At the end of the day, when I invest, and by the way, I invest. You don't know what I invest in. You have no idea companies that I've invested in. Because we have two styles of investors in Palestine. One smiles and wants to put in the quotes, I smiled today, tomorrow I'm going to smile again. I'm not that kind of an investor. So if you come to me with value-added idea, that's great. More important to me is to see who you are. What's your CV? What's your background? Are you going to be here in a year? And to me, I think that's what serious investors are investing in, the people. So the team that you create is what the investment is going to look at, probably before they look at the idea, because the idea, by the time somebody gets involved in it and the markets start changing, the idea will morph into something a little bit different than you think about at the beginning. But if the people aren't there, we're not going to benefit from the value of the resource itself.
So we have time for one more question?
Yeah. Sam, how do you see the NGO and the donor community, how do you see the role of the NGO and the donor community in supporting entrepreneurship and startups in Palestine? And what's your message to the private sector, especially to the big companies in supporting the startups?
Okay, two hard questions. I see the NGO world as a disruptive factor, a seriously disruptive factor, and I'll tell you why. And again, I don't like to generalize, so what I'm going to say is a generalization. It doesn't apply to every single effort. For the most part, NGOs, and before I say NGOs, I should say donors should not be implementers in our development. What I just said is a huge thing. When a donor, USAID, comes to Palestine, creates a partnership with X company, and X company uses the money because they have to give it to a company. They have to give it to what they call top tier company, a company that has a relationship with the donor. And that company comes. If the company is using 15 Palestinian civil society organizations to implement the project, I can live with that. What I'm having a hard time living with, and that's why today I wanted to go through for the first time in my life and learn the system, when the donor looks at Palestine and says, wow, that's a great market. They look like they're going to be in crisis for the next 100 years. Why should we keep serving their civil society? We'll just come to Palestine, we'll hire the best people in Palestine because we have salaries, right? We'll make them wear ties, and we'll give them a card with their name on it so they feel important. And we'll take 75% of the money for the US company, and we'll use the 25% with our own staff to do a couple things. To me, that structure of how the donor is intervening in Palestine is disruptive for two reasons. One, the bulk of the money does not come to the beneficiary of Palestine. The bulk of the money turns around and goes back to the donor country. That's one. Secondly, it is cannibalizing our labor force. And you all know this very well. I wanted to create a newspaper a couple years ago. And I made a serious business plan, and it didn't go through for three reasons. I'll tell you one of them. I couldn't find cost-effective graphic designers. The graphic designers that I wanted were hired. A couple of great ones were working with the big companies and they were good salaries, they weren't gonna move. And the other ones were working with NGO-oriented projects, which were double the salary that I can give them. So the donor companies are taking the best of our best, especially in marketing these days, leaving the private sector empty from a labor force that can serve us. That's a structural problem. I actually wrote about this about 10 years ago on This Week in Palestine, if you look it up. What I would tell the private sector, it depends what school of thought you're coming from. If you come from my school of thought, not mine, but the one that I adhere to, which is the private sector should not feel that they can do anything as long as it's illegal, as long as it's legal. I feel the private sector should be an entity that's responsible in the society. So if you come from that school of thought, I will tell the private sector, I love your CSR program, it's great, but I would love more if your core business had more of a developmental aspect to it. So forget about distributing computers to Tubas and bring your rates down a little bit, because that will give widespread incentive for people to do more with their dollar, more with their shekel. So I would say companies to be more responsible in the community and not just look at a very weak PA, a very distorted economy because of the Israeli component in it, and say, okay, this is a free field, this is a green field, we can do almost anything we want. I think that's disruptive. And there's cases that we can talk about of where it's shown to be disruptive, especially on the sectors that have a monopolistic tone to them, whether it's telecom, whether it's cement, whether it's petroleum. These kinds of sectors need to be either properly regulated or more competitive. Because if you think about it, and this is, I actually want to write something about this. If you think about what the West Bank economy, this tiny, occupied, depressed, fatigued economy, what we are serving, it will make your mind explode. What are we serving? What is the 16% VAT and the telecom expense and the electricity expense? What are we serving? We're serving a utility bill where half of our population doesn't pay utilities. That's number one. Number two, we're serving a Palestinian Authority which is expanded in numbers, which is making it so ineffective that all of us are looking for donors to fill the gap. It's serving a pension of the PLO and the PA from 50 years back. You get where I'm going? This tiny economy, when we buy the milk from the grocery store, I don't know what's embedded in that price, but I was hoping it wouldn't be somebody's pension from the PLO from the days of Beirut. It is. So we need to see, you know, we had a prime minister, without mentioning names, that boasted about transparency. Transparency to me is not putting a summary on the website. Transparency is being held accountable and showing me the line items. When we see 42% of our budget go to security, 1% go to agriculture, and most of the higher education facilities in Palestine near financial collapse, but too proud to announce it, there's something structurally wrong in our society. There's an article I want to point you to. It's on my website. I have a blog. It's epalestine.com. Yesterday I posted an article from the London Review of Books. It's by a Professor Robert Wade, W-A-D-E. He came here a couple of months ago, and he wrote an article about our economy. It's very short, a couple pages. Read it and weep. What he talks about is not going to be resolved unless we don't detach ourselves from our future and start holding people accountable. Thank you, everyone.
So before we end the night, I just want to do a little quick activity. We did this last time and it worked great. So what we're going to do is we all have unique skills that make us different than Gladys.
Even you.
Yeah, exactly. I know you have some skills. So what Sam said is we need to team up to create something that's successful. So we all have different skills that we can use. So let's share our skills. You guys could share our skills, and then after, when we're done, network, meet different people. At least meet 2 other people that you haven't met ever, and see if you can use those skills to create something. So I'm going to pick Faris. So Faris, you're going to get started. What's your skill?
Hello. Okay, so I'm a front-end developer at Insatur. I can provide technical skills for anyone who's using a web development application. And me and Diana, we manage a running group in Ramallah for those who want to stay fit and feel good. And I can make you guys laugh if I want, but I'm scared this time.
Thanks, Faris. Anyone else?
My name is Haneen and my friend here is Katie Hadda, and I think we can contribute in terms of accounting and auditing.
Thank you.
Talking about positivity, really I have a skill I cannot control that always I'm positive. And people always saying, you are always smiling. It's really I cannot control. This is what I love sometimes. Great. And plus I play music all the time.
I work with Saed, so yeah, he's always smiling. I grew up in the States, so my skill would be English writing, proposals, reports, that kind of thing, and also music.
Anyone else want to share?
Well, I have many, I think. First of all, I think accountants, most of them might know my name and my character I draw, Fresh Food, if you know it. Yeah. And a graphic designer, the one you didn't find before. Okay. I can help my clients in sharpening their ideas. This is something I'm good in. And creating the brand, like the myth of the logo, the logic of the logo. How do you create the brand and the message of your product and your company? This is something I did find myself good in. After my friends, I helped many of my friends sharpening their ideas and their products. Thank you.
I'm sorry. My first degree is engineering, and then I did a master in business. I'm good with numbers and business strategy, and yeah, that's what also interests me.
A little bit of everything, except technical. That's fine. What?
Your food.
Oh, thanks. I cook, he washes the dishes. It's a great team. Anyways, so we have a technical background. We have people who are technical. We have people that are business. We have people that develop for you. So get to know each other. Meet. See who stuck out to you. Go meet someone new. Exchange business cards if you have any. If you don't, bring them next time. We're not done. One more thing.
We already paid the money. I mean,
we have a little gift for Sam. So what represents Palestine most is olive tree. Olive tree. So it's olive. Thanks for everything. Sam will be around for the next hour. So if you want to get to know him, ask him any more questions, feel free.
I'm around 24.